Morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's good to see all of you. This is a great crowd of people here. And one of the things that I'm appreciative of is the opportunity to be with all of you today. And I'm very, very glad that we can come together to talk about this subject. So you will know from what you see behind me that we're going to start in Philippians chapter 4 and verse 8. And we're going to talk about that. One of the things that really impresses me is that we've got a variety of married couples that are here from, I don't know, maybe, well, let's say, how many of you have been married less than 5 years? Maybe, how many, you're the only ones? Okay. Oh, okay, I thought there might be a few other. How many in here have been married 50 years more? 50 or more? 1, 2, very good. So see, that's the span of things of which we are working with this morning. I appreciate that very much. Let me just give you a little quick story about, and this is something that Diane was relating to Paulette just a little bit ago. There was a man in Texas when we were doing some lessons in Texas, and he came to me in between the worship service and the Bible class, and he came to me, and he had a wife who was having dementia, and her hearing was very bad. She couldn't hear very good. And he came to me and he said, what is it that you could help me with in my marriage? And he's been married 50 years. At that time, I guess I was married 35 years, maybe something like that. And I said, okay, I'm thinking, you're asking me, and I should be asking you. And he said, I just need some help and assistance in the things that I need to do for my wife. And so I'm thinking, this is one of the things about marriage that all of us need to think about. You are, and we'll talk about this on Tuesday night, you are a lifelong learner when it comes down to marriage. Whether you're a husband or wife, it doesn't matter whether you've been married for, how long y'all been married? 8 months. If you've been married 8 months or 78 years, whatever, you're still learning. And your presence says a lot about your willingness to learn. There are people, when it comes down to what they think about marriage, is, I know everything I need to know. They came in with it, and they'll go out with it. And as a result, their marriage is absolutely miserable. And you being here says a lot about what you think about your marriage, and you want to do better with it. So let's talk about this. I will say this. After we read Philippians chapter 4, verse 8, there's going to be some very key points that are mentioned in this. Some of you may have read this before. But in Philippians 4, verse 8, we're going to go into our next session and talk about each one of these. And the next session, more than this one, will have you answering. It will be your responses to this based on what we're going to talk about at this moment. So Philippians 4, verse 8 says, finally, brethren. Some versions say, finally, brothers, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honorable, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, and whatsoever things are of good report. If there be any virtue, and if there be any praise, think on these things. Every one of those are matters of which I'm going to ask you in our next session to tell me what you think about what's true. Tell me what you think about what's lovely. Tell me what you think about what is noble in your marriage. If it came down to it, there are probably times in your marriage where there's been this moment where, guess what I'm thinking? Or you wonder what they're thinking, what your husband or what your wife is thinking. Can you read my mind? Can you tell me what is really happening? And that we know we can't do that. But there's a tendency for us to think that we can read our husband's mind. We think we can, I know what you're thinking. I know exactly what you're thinking. But how well do you know your spouse? So let me ask you these questions, okay? Got 4 questions that I want to ask you. What would your spouse pick if they had total control of the remote? What is your spouse's dream job? What is my favorite holiday? What is my favorite date? What is my favorite restaurant? Cody? What is Amanda's favorite restaurant? No. I am the leader of the discussion. I am the leader of the discussion. Yeah, what's your favorite restaurant? You want me to come back to you later? Okay, let me ask this. Daphne, if you had control of the remote, where would you go with it for Luke? Okay, okay, all right. What do you think? What do you think? Oh, Mickey Ray. What is your wife's favorite holiday?
Her favorite holiday is Christmas.
Christmas. Okay. All right. Very good. So do you know what she's thinking? Do you know what he's thinking? Do you know the answers to those questions? Well, there is, if you want some more information to talk about conversations, I've got something like this. What is our favorite, or what is her favorite vacation spot? What is his favorite season of the year, or what is her favorite season of the year? What is her favorite, or what is his favorite candy bar? What is let's see, what's the other one? What is her favorite pair of shoes? What is my dream job? Any of you wives know what your husband's dream job is? Yeah, what is it? Farmer. Okay, very good, good. What is your biggest pet peeve? So there's all kinds of questions that you might want to think about regarding, do I know what those answers are? Do I know what she's thinking? Do I know what he's thinking? Well, let me just change the thought about this, and let's talk about God. What's God thinking? 1 Corinthians chapter 2. Before we get into a little bit more meat of this message this morning, 1 Corinthians chapter 2, and I'm going to read all this, but verse 6 to verse 12 talks about very clearly God's wisdom. God's wisdom is something of which the rulers of this world do not know. This wisdom is what the people of the world do not understand. But this wisdom is revealed. And God doesn't say, okay, here's what I want you to do. I want you to figure out what I'm thinking. It's not one of these cases like God speaks truth, I didn't give you the silent treatment, you got to figure this out. God doesn't just let you say, figure it out, boss. It's your life. You do what you want to. You figure this out. I can't believe you don't know. I figured you would know exactly what I would want you to do. If you notice what is stated in verse 10, but unto us God revealed them through the Spirit, for the Spirit searcheth all things, yea, the deep things of God. For who among men knows the things of a man? Now this is getting personal. Save the spirit of the man which is in him. You're not there to sit and think, okay, well, what's she thinking? What is he thinking? Even so, the things of God none knows save the Spirit of God. You don't know what God thinks. Now, in the religious arena, all over the world, there are people that really believe they know what God thinks. I think God likes this. I think this is what God will be pleased with. I think this is what God feels good to me, so it feels good to him. And this is the way we think. We're almost like we're reading God's mind. It's like we know what he likes. We know what he wants. We know what pleases him. Yet, biblically, that's not true. You don't know what God thinks unless you have the ability to search out his mind. And according to Romans chapter 11 and beginning of verse 33, 34, 35, there is no one that sits and counsels God about what he's going to do. There's no one that figures all this out, and as a result of this, okay, here's what you need to tell everybody. His judgments are past finding out. So if we can't do this with God, who says we can do this with our husband or with our wife? We don't know unless it's revealed. And as a result of that, I think it's good for us to think about, we need to be thinkers of his will in our marriage, what he thinks about this. And I would say there's a lot of husbands that have probably entered into their marriage and they think they know what every woman needs. Every woman needs. And their wife is in the group of the every woman. And there's wives that have entered into marriage and they think they know what their husband needs because this is what every man needs. And this is what every man wants. So therefore, they put all the men, including their own husband, in that lot, or they include all the women in this lot like this is the woman that's just like all the rest. But that's not true. That is not true. So therefore, we can't think for God, and we can't think for our spouse. But we do need to know and think very seriously about our own. It does matter what we think. Keep your heart with all diligence, Proverbs 4 says, for out of it are the issues of life. Proverbs 23:7 says, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. And if you notice in the book of Matthew chapter 12, in verse 33 to verse 37, the thoughts of the person are very vital to their life, as he mentions in that text. He mentions this idea about, well, if you're trying to figure out what a good tree is versus a bad tree, good fruit versus evil fruit, he says in verse 35, the good man out of his good treasure brings forth good things, and the evil man out of his evil treasure brings forth evil things. Oh, there's all I need right there. That tells me everything I need to know about my wife and my husband, or my husband. I see what they do, and as a result, I know that's what they're thinking. I can tell you that they're mad because that's their actions prove it. I can tell you that they love me because their actions prove it. But it could be just a facade. It could be that you don't know the reason behind that anger. You don't have any idea that you may think you know, but you really don't. But then he says this, I want to say to you that every idle word that men shall speak, that you shall give account thereof in the day of judgment. For by thy words thou shalt be justified, and by thy words thou shalt be condemned. You don't speak unless you think first. And as a result of that, that not only has its impact upon our spiritual life, that has an impact upon our personal life. Even the same thought is made in the book of Luke chapter 6, verse 43 to verse 45, about how it is that we need to think about what we're doing in order that the right fruit come out. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But let's think about this. In your marriage, do you think love? Do you think it constantly? Do you think forgive? And do you think to understand your spouse? Do you think that? Or do you think love, okay, I think love, but you're thinking about yourself more than you're thinking about that love going out from you. You're thinking about forgiveness. You're thinking, oh, you should be forgiving to me. You should forgive me regardless of what it is I do. So the forgiveness is all that about that what you're going to get more so than it is about what you're going to give. And also, what do you think about your spouse? Do you understand? Do you even take the time to understand? So you got to change your thinking about what your marriage is to be and what you are, who you are to be. So changing your thinking can change your marriage. That's exactly what Romans chapter 12, verse 2 talks about regarding our own life as a Christian. Therefore, let's just get out of our mind the thinking that we may have heard before we ever got married about all men and all women. Let's just get out of our mind all the thoughts about maybe what we heard about marriage before we got married and while we've been married. And let's get all the voices of the world out of our mind. And let's just change our thinking to consider Romans chapter 12, verse 2, because he says, be not conformed to this world. That's the first thing, be not conformed to this world. But then he says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind that you may prove what is the good, acceptable, and perfect will of God. So go in that direction. Go in the direction that will allow itself in your marriage to think the things that will present good, acceptable, and perfect will of God. Not that, oh, I think God will want me to be. It's not that God will want me to say, God will want me to think. It's a matter of what his will actually will be. And that's why I want to get into Philippians chapter 4 after we are done with this first segment of time and talk about what is it that you think about related to the purity of your marriage, because that's what he said in Philippians 4 verse 8. In order to get started really quick, there are three particular sections of this that I want us to think about. And the first one is just think about yourself. What do you think of yourself in marriage? I'm just going to give you just 3 or 4 seconds to think about that question. All right? Whatever word or phrase or you've got established in your mind about your marriage, then I want you to think about this. I want you to think about this. Genesis 1, 26 and 27 is you and I are made in the image of God, male and female. Okay, we are image bearers of God. We think, well, that's easy. That's easy. And then it gets a little bit more deeper when you start talking about Genesis chapter 2, verse 18 to verse 25 as it relates to relationships. So now I understand I'm made in the image of God, but then what is the impact of that about me that's going to impact this relationship of which God's beginning to establish in Genesis, the 2nd chapter? Now we pull in somebody else to think about. We pull in a male and pull in a female in this relationship. And how do they think about it? So think about it just a minute. What would Adam have thought at the moment of which woman was made? Now, if let's say, for example, you didn't read the Bible, you just heard about this event that took place, and all of a sudden, here's this woman made for man. What would you think he would think? But you don't have to guess. You know exactly what he thinks. Because he says, this is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman. Regardless of what the woman has ever first thought about herself in being made for man, he describes for her who she is to him. They both are made in the image of God. Absolutely, both man and woman. So here's what I want you to think about related to this before we go further. However you think about yourself as a husband or as a wife, removes the fear, removes the insecurities, removes the inferiority about who you are, and also removes the fact that you think you're not good enough. Or you'll never be able to elevate your life to a certain expectation. There have been several couples that Diane and I have worked with that the wife feels like she's a total failure and almost believes that all the way back to the days that they were married. And the husband, he will talk about, as a case of which we were dealing with a couple now that are dealing with his pornography way back in the days of his teenage years. And he said, I'm really just acting like a dog. That's his thinking about himself. So if you find yourself so pressed down about how you think about yourself, then Genesis 1 or Genesis 2 is not even in your picture. It's not your image because that's not who you are at this moment. So therefore, to go back to the beginning and go from here seems a very good point, no matter if you've been married for 8 months or if you're married for 60 years. So let's think about this. In Romans chapter 12, God even emphasizes clearly how it is that we are the people, in verse 3, the grace of God that was given to me to every man that is among you, not to think of himself more highly than you ought to think, but to think soberly, according as God has dealt to each man a measure of faith. So here you've got a moment of which you're not pressed down, you're not feeling bad about yourself, but then you get to the point of thinking, oh, I am the answer of every woman's dream as a man. I am every man's wish as a woman. It's like you're really proud about who you are, how attractive you are, how handsome you are, everything about you. You can do all things. You can do everything. But then he humbles that to the point of saying not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but is to think soberly, according as God has dealt to each man a measure of faith. So we're going in two different extremes here in some cases about how it is that couples seem to think. Oh, let me back up before, I'll just let you read that, but this idea of how you think about your marriage has a lot, it's very similar to what I hear brethren in the church say about, it's like 1 Corinthians chapter 12, that it begins in verse 12 and it goes down to verse 25. It talks about if, you're not the foot, you're not the hand, you're not the eye, then is there really a place for me? And there are people that are saying, I just don't know what to do in the church. I don't know where I should function. I don't know where my role is. All those kind of questions that come up, it's like they're isolated and they're wanderers and they have no sense of direction. It's like, I don't know where I'm going to be placed. I don't know where I go next. Well, Romans chapter 12, verse 3 takes care of that. 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 18 says, okay, everybody needs to know that this is where God put you. It's where God put you. 1 Corinthians 12, verse 18. So let's think about husbands just a moment. And I'm going to read all the things in Ephesians chapter 5, but I'm just going to point out just a few things in verse 23 to verse 33 just to let us all think about this. Okay, the husband is the head of the wife. Okay? Then he says a little bit later that he's to be the one in verse 25 that loves his wife. But then he gets into a little bit more specific details about what this love is and says in verse 26, that's going to be a means of sanctification because of what you do. There is this means of glorifying and making sure there's holiness and without blemish. That's what Jesus would do with the church, parallel with what a husband would do with his wife. Even as it says in verse 28, repeating what was stated in verse 25 rather, husbands, love your wives. And then he emphasizes this. He even talks about the sacrificial part. He says in verse 25, gave himself up for it. But then he says it this way. He says, as their own bodies. As their own bodies. Then he changes the tune. And then he that loves his own wife loves himself. He nourishes and cherishes, and he cleaves in verse 31. So what do you think about yourself as a husband? These are all based on what scriptures teach. But let's just think about this, just first of all. Regardless of how you feel about yourself as a husband, you chose to be one. So that just tells me, and that tells all of us that are husbands, we believe we can do it. We believe that we could be a husband to this woman that's sitting next to us, or that's our wife. That's an amazing thing. We're made in God's image, and he gave us this opportunity, gave us this responsibility, and here we are in the middle of it. But how many of you husbands think you're a jerk? How many of you husbands criticize your appearance? I mean, you do this. Your wife doesn't do it. You criticize your appearance, your social skills, your spiritual maturity, your work, and have these thoughts of you come as a result of you start comparing yourself with all these other husbands and where they stand in life and their size and their looks and their position and all these kind of things. And as a result, you're a jerk. As a result, you criticize your appearance. As a result, you criticize all these things about you. But then maybe you're not that husband. Maybe you don't think that way. Maybe you think, I'm the hero. I am the master. I am the Lord. I am the man that's the boss. I am what I am. I just know so much. I can do so much. So it's not that you're pressing yourself down, but you're more the oppressor. You're the one that's making sure everybody's going to do it your way. That kind of thing. And then let's change tunes. What do you think about yourself as a wife? I know a lot of wives will look at Proverbs 31 and see that is so intimidating. That's so out of my league. That is so far-fetched from what I could ever possibly be. But I go back to the same thing with you as I would go to a husband and say, okay, you chose to be a wife because you chose to accept his proposal to you. And you said, I do. So therefore, just in that framework, that the image of God placed within you and the invitation to be a wife by this man, now you found yourself to be one. So that just tells me you can do it. You can do that. But is the idea of being a wife one of these things that you have found, I've failed in every possible way? I just never could measure up to what I thought a wife ought to be. And you criticize your appearance, and you criticize your skills, and you criticize everything about who you are spiritually. And you have this, again, this idea of comparison syndrome, of comparing yourself in all the looks and the attitudes and the whereofs related to other women that are wives. And as a result, that comparison doesn't really match up to what you think a wife ought to be. But then when you look at Scripture, you think, oh boy, that really makes me feel bad. Like the worthy woman. But to realize that the worthy woman is a priceless gem in the eyes of the husband of which she has, and as the book of 1 Peter chapter 3 talks about, well, Titus chapter 2 talks about, this woman is a woman that has the ability to teach others, and more especially, she can love her own husband and love her children. And then the one in 1 Peter 3 is the woman that is trying to do what she can to help her husband come to the Lord, and as a result, words don't do it, and she is given an opportunity through her character, through her meek and quiet spirit, to lend itself toward the wife she needs to be to her husband. Can you do that? Well, some women seem to think they are every man's dream, and they flaunt it, and they show it, and they're flashy, but they're also very contentious. They try to be the one that controls, and they think they can do that. They think, I'm better than he is. I just know I am. I think much clearer than he does, and everything about else related to that. But let me let you think about this. What do you think about in marriage matters to your marriage? What you think about yourself matters to your marriage. So let me let you think about it regarding this. How you think about your marriage, how you think about yourself becomes to be for your spouse someone they can either come close to because of your thinking, or they move away. They move away from you. They come real close to you, or they just stay away. I just can't be around him, or I can't be around her, or because of the way they feel, they just seem like there's somebody that can come real close to. Or what you think about yourself sometimes is used to insult you, embarrass you, or blame you. So, for example, when it comes down to the idea of what you think about yourself, sometimes your spouse can take that and say, okay, he never could. He thinks he knows everything, but I want to tell you something that he doesn't. And you tell that to other people, but that he's not really what he thinks he is. She thinks I can do anything. But you know as a husband, you can't do anything because you've already told her that. And then she verbalizes that. She thinks I'm mad. But are you really mad? You just think it was never spoken. So as a result, he can't, or he always, those statements that are made, he thinks they know, can, but they can't. All those things, in other words, your spouse is taking what you think and they're verbalizing it and further pushing you down or embarrassing you or insulting you. And as a result of that, you begin to think even more about that. How do I feel about me? How do I feel about me? I get frustrated because I think this way about me. I get lonely or worried or anxious, nervous, self-centered, unkind. All those things as a result of what I think about me. How I think about myself is this is the way that it is. You've almost resigned yourself to there's no improvement here. It never gets any better. And to double that, you hear your spouse say what you think about yourself. And they only say that because you've already verbalized it to them. You say, I'm not this and I'm not that. I am this, I am that. And as a result, you just verbalize it to everybody. My husband thinks he can do everything, or my wife thinks she's this. And when they say they think they're that, it's not because they just come up with something. You've already said it. You've already verbalized that. And they're just adding to what you're thinking because you've already stated it. Let's change this. Romans chapter 8. In Romans 8, verse 6, He says, the mind of the flesh is death. And this is thinking. The mind of the flesh is death, but the mind of the Spirit is life and peace. All spouses, every spouse, what they think about themselves often comes out in words or actions like frustration, like loneliness, or being unkind. But Romans 8, verse 6 says, the mind of the flesh is death, but the mind of the Spirit is life and peace. What is it as a husband and a wife is your thinking? Is it like this mind? Is it this mind? Verse 15. Now, this is God the Father speaking to us and saying, for you receive not the spirit of bondage again into fear, but you receive the spirit of adoption, whereby we cry, Abba, Father. So if you look at it from a spirit of bondage related to your marriage and your thinking, you just press yourself down into this captivity so much, you're afraid to do anything. You're afraid to go anywhere. You're afraid to even be with your spouse anywhere. And you're afraid to say. But when it comes down to our relationship with God, receive the spirit of adoption whereby we cry, Abba, Father. Think this way about who God created you, like we talked about in Genesis 1, and then in this relationship as it relates to your marriage, Genesis chapter 2. And this is good for any spouse at any stage in their marriage. Psalm chapter 139, verse 14, talks about how it is that we are the ones who think, or should think, I should say, how it is that God made us. In verse 14, I will give thanks unto thee, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are thy works, and that my soul knows right well. This is what God's given me the opportunity to do. I should believe this is what I should be. If you watch and listen and compare yourself to all the thoughts of the world, then you'll be exactly like everybody else. You'll be like them. But God's saying, I don't want you to be like this. I don't want you to be like this. But let's change thoughts here. And let's talk about what you think about your spouse. What do you think about your spouse in marriage? Let's go back just a minute in Ephesians chapter 5 and look at something here and just look at these. Let's see, let's look at verse 22 to verse 25. Wives, be in subjection to your own husbands, as unto the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ also is the head of the church, being himself the Savior of the body. But as the church is subject to Christ, so let the wives be also to their husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave himself up for it. Those words just really enunciate very clearly the supreme thought that every husband and every wife should have in the role that they have in their marriage. This is not competition. This is not competing. They're different. And as a result of that, if we just took that out of our head as this is a matter of competition, then we would really find ourselves understanding what the head of the household would be, as well as what the submissive part of the woman should be. At times, though, this thinking about this passage, if you presented that to the world, it's almost like it's received with such disdain that's really not the going thing as it relates to husbands and wives and married couples. And it's really hard for me to adopt this kind of thinking. And I don't believe this is really what we're supposed to be doing. Well, these are specifically things of which God's given you the responsibility to do. And you got to think related to these responsibilities. What do you think about your spouse? Well, what do you think about your spouse before you got married? What'd you think? Randy, what'd you think about Jamie before you got married? Yeah, before.
Great.
You want to keep going? You're doing a roll there. You're doing good. You're doing good. Okay. Y'all been married 8 months? Tell me what you thought about him before y'all got married. Okay? Kind and what else? Caring, okay. All right. You got some more? Nope. That's all you needed. Okay, that's all you needed. Okay. But I think when you think about this, did you think about one another? Do you think about one another very much? If you notice in the book of Philippians, the second chapter, you will see in Philippians chapter 2 this thought of which, when you talk about relationships in the kingdom, and if you don't want to notice this is something that is very key to me in this passage is the word if. So let's say, for example, and I'm going to assume for it, Kelsey, is that right? Keely. I'm assuming that these thoughts that you've got about your spouse are pretty well the same. At least I hope they're pretty equal. Maybe they've increased to the point of elevated to another level. I hope so. But let's just say if you want those thoughts to continue, and this is for everybody too, if you want these thoughts about your spouse before you got married to continue, what do you think that's going to take? If there is any exhortation in Christ, if there is any consolation of love, if there is any fellowship of the Spirit, if any tender mercies and compassion, make full my joy that you be of the same mind, having the same love, being of one accord, of one mind. He talks about the oneness and the unity. But then he says, do nothing through faction or through vainglory, but in lowliness of mind, each counting other better than himself. Not looking, each of you to his own things, but each of you also to the things of others. It's coming away from you is this thinking that's very, very important. If all these things in verse 1 and 2 are going to be a part of what you would think, oh, I love to see that image in our marriage, then it's going to have to be something of which you find yourself coming away from you and looking into the heart of the other person. And not looking at them, as the beginning of verse 3 says, through faction or vainglory. Oh, I can do better than that. Or they're not as good at all these things that we think about ourselves. We got to come away from that to the point that we look not each of you to his own things, but each of you also to the things of others. Here's a big challenge I want to give to you. It relates to this. And then verse 5 says, have this mind in you, which is also in Christ Jesus, which is very much a key thing that relates to how your thinking will be related to your husband or to your wife. Every day, to think about your spouse, you could ask them, what is it that I could do for you today? Now, you may get, I don't think there's anything, but then you may receive something, I would like to see if you would, whatever that answer may be. So you're putting yourself, you're trying to put yourself in their position to see what you can do, think about them. And as a result of that, you will find yourself understanding this great moment of love and of, as verse 1 says, fellowship. And as a result of that, it comes, Kelsey, is that right? Keely, man, I'll get it right someday. But anyway, where he says this idea of coming along and saying, okay, tender mercies and compassion, that kindness and care that comes out of him as a result of you doing this, it's, oh, he was so nice to me. But he might need a little prompting, or she might need a little prompting by what you ask. And you see all these things revealed because you don't want, oh, I think she will like this today. I think I'll do this for her. I think I'll just mow the grass. I think she'll really like that. She may not care about the grass. She don't care if the grass gets up. But then she thinks, oh, I think I'll fix him whatever, and he despises Brussels sprouts. You know, I mean, you fix it as something new, but you gotta, what does he need? What does he want? Think about those kind of things. How you think about your spouse determines how you treat your spouse. To whatever degree that is, you may think, well, okay, he's abusing me. That's what you think. He's always talking down to me. But maybe you think he's your enemy. He's always running me down. But I think there's a lot to be said for realizing when you talk about this idea of your relationship, you must understand how you think about them is just like how you think about yourself. How you think about them makes a lot of difference in your marriage. So what should we be thinking? Let me let you turn to, we're not going to read all these, but 1 Corinthians 13 is probably a very good place in verse 4 to verse 8 to help us think about what our marriage should be like. It's just about seeing the best. He says, love suffers long and is kind, love does not envy, and then goes through all these particular details of what love does, and then says in verse 7, bears all things, and then verse 8 says, love never fails. And you look at all of that, and you think, well, love is about the best. It's about the best of the other person, and we're going in that direction. We want to think about that thing that relates to what the best of that person is. So let me just pick out somebody else. Jason, when it came down to being married to Meredith, what is the best, I don't know, however many you want to mention, best thing about Meredith?
Is there a time limit?
Well, I've only got maybe just a little bit of time, but go ahead. Give me 2 or 3. What's the best thing about, before you got married, before, not while, but before?
Right. Before, honestly, the biggest thing was she pushed me to be better as far as more godly.
Okay.
I was not in a good spot, and
Okay.
she was.
Okay.
Just her example of being godly.
Mm-hmm.
That really inspired me. And
Okay.
that brought me closer to her. She saw past a lot of my, I don't know, I tried to portray myself as a certain way.
Okay.
A lot of pride and that.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Past it.
Good. Good. All right. What's the best thing, Jessica, out of Brad?
Selfless.
Okay. All right. If they are going to be that person before, do you think you could see the best in them later, rather than seeing all the faults and the really irritating things about them? In other words, can you overlook all those little bitty things to bring back out what it is that you see before you got married? It's still there. It's still there. But sometimes the tendency is how we see our spouse. We don't see the best anymore like we did before. And as a result, we just kind of dismiss that because of all the things that they're doing right now. All those little bitty things that just really irritates us, really aggravates us, gets under our skin, and it annoys us, and all those kind of things. And we get to the point of thinking they can't, and they're not able to, and all these kind of things. But then we find ourselves realizing that what they had before they got married, they could still have after. But do I see that? Do I see that? Or do I see all these other little qualities? That's really important. Because if we're not careful, we find ourselves coming to the point of lust, of a conflict. Because, and I'll talk a little bit more about this later in the week, but in James chapter 4, this is going to be something we'll talk about on Monday night. In Ephesians chapter 4, there's a moment by which, James chapter 4, there's a moment by which he talks about, okay, all these wars, these fightings, these moments of which you get at each other, where do they come from? It comes about because of the way you think, about what you want, your lust, your members, your pleasures. And as a result, it's all eyes are off of what they're best at. Now it's all for what's best for me. And as a result, that's where all this killing comes in, and all this coveting comes in, and all the wars and the fightings come in. You don't remember all that. And then you get to the point, well, okay, we were always on time, but now we're always late. And she always makes us late. We're always going to be 10 minutes late. We're always going to be 15 minutes late. Always. We're always. Well, really? Is it always? Or is it just in your mind what you're thinking about? They always make us late. And as a result, you get to battle with each other about that. Always this, always that. Always roll our eyes. Always talks too loud. Always talk too little. Get frustrated. Always falls asleep when we go to a movie. Always tells the same story. Always does this. Always. It's like a repeated cycle. But all those negative feelings about your spouse become to be this right here. They become to be, let me get this up here. They become to be your narrative. They become to be your story. What you're thinking about your spouse becomes to be the story you tell yourself about your spouse. And you tell it over and over. It's like that statement I just made, this always comes up. He or she has been like this ever since we were married. Always been this way. He has always acted. She has always done this. That must mean our time's up here. But here I think, and I'm not even in my third point yet, really, but I think one of the greatest examples here is I've been thinking about you today. This is an intentional thought about it. Now, that statement, I've been thinking about you today, is about the other person. It's you've been thinking about your spouse, okay? But what is the thought about, that intentional thought about your spouse today? I've been thinking about you. I've been thinking about what you just said, what you said to me the bus before we left the house, before I left the house. I'm thinking about that. I've been thinking about that all day, and it's aggravated me, and it's made me so upset, and I've been so disgusted, and it's almost like you can't wait to get back to them and start it back all over again. But the other flip side of that is I've been thinking about you today, and I've been thinking about what it was as we left each other, and I must tell you, I'm sorry. That's your thought. I've been thinking about you all day, working yourself up to the point you're going to apologize and you're going to ask for forgiveness. Or I've been thinking about you all day, and I think we all just go out to eat dinner together. Or I need to show you more attention. Or I need to show more care for you. Or I need to speak more kindly to you. And it's not that you were unkind before you left each other. It was just that you needed to be more kind. So in other words, it comes back to the beginning. Whatever you think is becoming to be your story, it's becoming to be your narrative. That's where you stay. And as a result of this, you think about them, but it's either the extreme of the bad or the good. But they're intentional. They always come up. It's just like a revolving door. You open it up, let something else out, but something else comes in. It's intentional. But what do you think about your spouse's emotions? I mean, husbands, wives, all have the emotions. The happy, the sad moments. In Romans chapter 12, verse 15 says, rejoice with them that rejoice and weep with them that weep. The answer to what you think about your spouse's emotions is empathy. The sad moments, the frustrating moments, whatever that may be. Right in the middle of it, it might not be a good time to be real honest and give a lot of advice because you want to come close to them. In other words, their thoughts, you want to be connected to their thoughts and what they're thinking to the point that you will say, well, I understand that. I understand where you are. And if I was going through the same thing, I'd feel the same way. In other words, just showing this empathy. And I've got a lot of other illustrations about that too, but I just want to give that as a moment of emphasis there because your spouse is not a problem to fix, but a person to be loved. That's how you think. Or that's how you should think related to your marriage. They're not, okay, I'm going to fix this. I'm going to stop this. I am not going to have this anymore. We're going to put an end to this. No, this is a matter of you're going to see what you can do. I do agree that there are attitudes, actions, behaviors that are immoral, ungodly, that need to be put away. I agree. I understand that. But then there are just some emotions that come along or some things of which they're not going to be the one you fix, but they're going to be the one you love in the midst of all the difficulties or all of the little nuances of which their life is experiencing. Let's get into this one. I'm going to have maybe about 5 minutes to talk about this, but we're going to get into this a little bit more in the second session. What do you think about your marriage? Well, Isaiah chapter 55, verse 6 to verse 9 talks about, okay, you need to seek the Lord in verse 6. You need to seek the Lord, okay? Why do you need to seek the Lord? He goes into it by saying, okay, your thoughts are not his thoughts. Your thoughts are not higher than his thoughts. And your ways are not higher than his ways. So you can't say, okay, I think I can do better than this. I think I can do better at this than what God's word says about this. Your thoughts about your marriage. Well, ask yourself this question. Are we going to last? Are we going to make it? Is our marriage going to last? I mean, we've been here for 40, 50 years. We might as well stay here. Might as well. I have no place else to go. I have no place else to go. My children won't let me come live with them. So I can't do this anymore. I just can't do this anymore. And that last one comes as a result of a couple that Diane I've been dealing with and working with. That's a bad, I'm sorry, I'll take that back. That's not good. Working with, trying to lead them to Jesus over the last year. And they are a couple that he filed for divorce back in April of last year just so he could get custody or greater visitations with his daughter, who was, I think, about 3 years old. And ever since that divorce decree went out from him, and these two people are Christians, by the way, she has, and they, I should say, he and her both have just thrown barbs at each other. It's just like they pull the bow back and throw another arrow. I mean, the criticisms just abound, just intensely. And I'm getting all the text messages from both of them. She will say one thing and he will say another. And she says, you need to do this to him. And he says, you need to do this to her. And they got the answers to it, see. They got the answers to all the dilemmas about what they need to do, but they go through all these things. And then it got to the point where I did not receive any contact from them since August of this year. And then all of a sudden, just happened to be this last week, she sends a text message that says this. Well, she said, would you appear in court to testify against his abuse? I said, I will come to court and I will testify against the abuse that both of you have given to each other. That's what I will do. From all that I've got, for all the information, I will testify in the court for the abuse that both of you have given each other. She wants me to be on her side against him so that she can receive full custody of her daughter and him have nothing to do with their daughter ever again. And then I said, we have offered to you the help and the counsel, but both of you refused it. And here's her answer. No, I don't want help for my marriage. I no longer love him or have any desire to be with him, especially after what he's done to our daughter. There is no fixing it. And I just want out so bad. She used the word so, S, and then O, for I don't know how many letters, probably 5, 6, 7 letters. I want out so bad. I want out so bad. I just can't do this anymore. You'd be amazed how many people that are Christians are wanting out as quick as they can. I am not giving the two of you this information to say yours may not last long. But yours can be the resilient couple that's much different than this one. And this couple's been married maybe 4 years at best. Well, not even that long, maybe, 2 or 3 years? How many? About 3 years, yeah. What do you think about your marriage? Well, what was your thinking before you went into it? Oh, this is going to be easy. It's going to be a piece of cake. Or your thinking may have been, we're not going to be like my mom and dad. We are not going to be like them. We're not going to duplicate this. We are just going to be totally different than they are. Or, I'm tired. This is awesome. Or this is awful. I mean, there are so many different adjectives that you could use to think about it. It's boring. I'm lonely. I feel like I'm all by myself. I love it. I wish I had waited, or wish we'd done it sooner. It's dying. It's lovely. I mean, there's a list. I can go on and on about this. But how do you think now? Based upon going into it, based upon how it is now. And that's why I pointed out to Jessica and Jason about what is it that you view now, and Randy Keeley. Oh, wow, got it. Okay. How you feel now about what your relationship is. I'm looking forward to the opportunity to hear more about how you think about it going forward, more so than it was just before we got married. I mean, you can tell all these real integral details and wonderful stories about how you got together and what he is and who she is and who he is. Yet, when you think about it now, is it very descriptive and very, very much a part of your narrative about what you're doing? And please, Vida, make sure you understand, what do you think it takes to have a great marriage? What do you think it takes to have a great marriage? I got I'm not going to get into this, but there is a woman by the name of Helen Fisher that did a brain study of couples that say they're madly in love after an average of about 20 years of marriage, and she found some common denominators in every one of those couples' brains that is very significant. But as a result of that, talking about that positive illusion that they had in their mind about their marriage, they become less doubtful, greater trust, higher sense of security, less conflict, higher marital satisfaction, higher personal satisfaction, increased risk of relationship ending, feelings that are very much high regarded for their relationships, and a lasting intimacy. Those are things that she's found as research through those couples that say they're madly in love with each other. But what do you think about the length of your marriage? I mean, do you even think about faithfulness other than to say, okay, we got married and this is it, we're gonna stay here? But if you think about faithfulness, this is the idea of the character and the trust that we're always going to be together no matter what we face, no matter what we go through. And I can trust you and you can trust me regardless of our errors, our sin. What's the purpose of us? Jesus stated it very clearly. What God joined together, let man put asunder. What's the purpose of being a disciple? Well, John 13 says, so that all men will know that you're my disciples if you love one another. That same thing ought to characterize marriages. And hopefully you're just thinking about it. You're just thinking about that, thinking about it more seriously and more concentrated effort on what your purpose in marriage should be. And maybe God will bless you as a result. There's more than I can say, but let's just take a break here for about, 5-6 minutes. Then we'll come back, and I'm going to get your responses to Philippians 4 verse 8, okay? I'm not going to do all the talking as much as I'm going to get the talking from you, okay?